Good evening. Welcome to this edition of the Evening Review. I'm your host, Jemima Beekes. Now, World Press Freedom Day is celebrated on 3 May every year. This year's celebration takes place under the theme Journalism Under Surveillance. The theme spotlights the impact of digital surveillance by state and non-state actors on journalism, freedom of expression, and privacy. And for us to put this into perspective, we have Zoe Titus from the Namibia Media Trust in studio. Now, before we go into that interview, let's have a look at our headlines for tomorrow. SWAPO Youth League slams kindergarten pension preservation bid. Now, the pension preservation bid that's been hitting the headlines the last few weeks has also caught the attention of the SWAPO Youth League. Not our fight, Gidinwa. The executive director of the Ministry of Urban and Rural Development, Mr. Daniel Gidinwa, has said they are not taking sides in the ongoing leadership dispute in the Overhero Traditional Authority. Namibia, third richest in Africa. Despite increasing unemployment rates in the country, Namibia has been ranked as one of the wealthiest countries on the continent in a recent study. Welcome back. Now, as I've said earlier, we are going to talk about the World Press Freedom Day that will be celebrated next week on the 3rd of May. And our guest is Zoe Titus, who's not only the director of Namibia Trust, she was also recently elected in 2020 as chairperson of the Global Forum for Media Development. Thank you for joining us in the studio, Zoe.
Thank you, Jemima. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Now, Zoe, media freedom is one of the key issues that is usually a topic when we discuss the press freedom. Now, Namibia is the country ranked the most freest press on the continent. Do you agree that it speaks to the reality on the ground?
You're throwing me right into it, Jemima. To a great extent, I agree. And then, there are also mitigating factors. We have ranked #1 for several years. Actually, for more than a decade, Namibia has been probably in the top 3. Mm-hmm. But one needs to look at the criteria set for ranking the countries. So, yes, we have not had the arrest or jailing of journalists. We haven't had the overt threats against the media. So on that score, yes. Mm-hmm. We rank very highly, #1, of course. But then there are other things and issues that we need to consider. We need to consider the media, the broader media ecosystem, the regulatory environment, and if that is conducive for the work of the media. I mean, the most important thing that consistently comes up every year, and this is more than 30 years after independence, is the fact that we still do not have an access to information law that would guarantee not only journalists but citizens in general the right to access information, public information and to a certain extent private information. So that said, and in this environment where corruption is so rife, and there are news reports on a daily basis of a new scheme that has been exposed. It is, I think we should be ashamed of the fact that we do not yet have a whistleblower protection law or witness protection law that is actively being implemented. Mm-hmm. These things need to be considered. So yes, but I think that there are also reasons why our press freedom in Namibia is, I think, guarded diligently by journalists, by media professionals, because Namibia comes from a very violent history. So a lot has been done to ensure the peace and tranquility that we supposedly experience. A free press that was subverted before independence, during apartheid and colonialism. Fundamentally, the idea there was to prevent the expression and the free expression of the largest portion of the population. So these freedoms that we now have, those are guarded very diligently.
Speaking about freedoms, you've been in the industry for quite some time. What, in your view, are the biggest challenges that are facing media freedom in this country, and the ones that are persistently remaining?
We are a very large country with a very small population. And a country where there are also huge disparities. I saw the headline that you previewed earlier. Namibia ranked the third richest country in Africa. It's mind-boggling, really, considering just this huge disparity between the rich and the poor. And that brings to bear so many other social ills and evils that we need to deal with. I think one of the things that is really part of the responsibility of the media is to expose these inequalities and the impact that that has on the daily lived experiences of every Namibian journalist. So I would say that one of the challenges that we have is still a much greater focus on human-centered media content, ensuring really that there is equity of voices, that the most marginalized of peoples do have a space in the media, in whatever platform. But digitalization, I think that is a recurring theme, and this is even before COVID. I think even a decade before COVID, we could see that there is a decline in media revenues. That is probably the biggest challenge. Then there remains the challenge of the juniorization of newsrooms, something that I would insist on that we need to rectify. I was in a different discussion earlier today where we were talking about transformation of the industry, or the lack of transformation in the industry, seeing greater diversity, seeing more women in top management positions. I really feel that that is something that should be of particular concern, because if we don't have that diversity within the media, how does the media ensure that that diversity is within its content and within its own processes? Because the media too has to be accountable to its audiences, to the citizenry at large.
No, absolutely, and interesting that you talk about the voices, that gender equality voices, lack of female voices in the media. Why do you think is it that we struggle to get these voices? We are in the 21st century right now. Why is it that we still find it very difficult to get expert opinion from female newsmakers?
There are so many studies on the issue. One site, for example, that I support outright is Quote This Woman.
Yes, me too.
Because it provides a space and it actually physically goes out looking for female voices on a range of issues, so that, providing a service to the media, so that you know on this economic issue, there is a female voice that can be recruited to or sourced for expert opinion. I think that there are many factors. I think we still deal with patriarchy. We still deal in our own spaces as a cultural issue. And to a certain extent, I also think that we as women devalue ourselves. And so it's much broader than just a structural issue within institution. It is a mindset that must be reversed collectively and much more broadly.
Speaking about a mindset, in Namibia, almost all, if not all, newspapers are run by men. Do you think that is also one of the reasons that we see what we see in the papers?
Well, and this is where a media lecturer on gender may have a very different view, because there are so many factors that come to play. Because being gender sensitive or pro-diversity or being a feminist doesn't mean that you can't be a man and be a feminist. So I wouldn't put it really just at the door of the male executives, but I would say that you are being called out on this and you have responsibility to make a change and to ensure that this change is seen and lived through your institution.
You were speaking about a media lecturer. Now, recently I spoke to Professor Ed Meyer. You are familiar with him, for a different study. And his observation was that Namibian journalists are underpaid compared to other Southern African countries. And he feels that that is opening up the door, or it has the potential to give birth to brown envelope journalism. What do you make of this?
I think that there is brown envelope journalism in Namibia. I mean, I've heard of this. I haven't had the experiences to say that, you know, this is a practical experience that I have, you know, am familiar with. But, and you see, one of the things that I think is also of critical importance is the fact that there is a dearth of real research on media and journalism in Namibia. I would really love to hear, I mean, where Ed Meyer received his figures from, and how he made his assessments. Because, for example, I know that it is very difficult to get those kinds of figures or stats from the media houses themselves. They are not very willing to share what they would consider as confidential information about salaries, etc. But in terms of salary levels, I would say that Namibian journalists certainly are much better compensated than journalists in Malawi, in Zimbabwe, Lesotho, Eswatini. A journalist, a senior journalist in Zimbabwe, for example, receives a monthly salary of plus minus $60. That, I mean, that's was exposed in a study that was done last year. So, I mean, I can refer to verified figures. So, I mean, let's make that comparison to, you know, the situation in Namibia. But yes, certainly, I think that we are losing a lot of talent. Aside from just brown envelope journalism, I think that we are losing a lot of talent from media houses, in media houses, because of poor compensation. But then again, you see, there's always a flip side to every story. Journalism, no one is going to get rich from journalism. If you much later in your career diversify your sources of income, yes, then you may generate alternative income. But if you are a day-to-day beat journalist, you would have to do it for the passion of the issue and the profession. There's not going to be $1 million salary waiting for you at the end of the month.
Don't you think it is time that we move away from do it for the passion and you won't get reach from journalism mentality. I mean, if one looks at the disparities between what journalists earn and what editors earn.
Well, that is a different topic.
Yeah, okay.
That's a different topic altogether, because then you are looking at what the management, or let's say editorial, or the business managers in a media setup, how much they are earning compared to the day-to-day journalists, the B journalists who are actually producing the content that is supporting the actual product. So that there, and in all commercial entities, I think there is that disparity. I do believe that there were reports in the South African media very recently also about the disparity between salaries of executives compared to the general workforce. So that gap certainly needs to be revised.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, you were elected the chairperson of the Global Forum for Media Development last year. What is the significance of this position?
Well, people made a lot of noise about it at the time. Well, it's quite a prestigious entity. It's a Global Forum for Media Development, which brings together those that work in the area of media development on a number of issues where very high-level lobbying is done to support the media development sector. And the reason for that is because let's look at globally the funding that goes to support of media development. I think at this point in time, it's about 0.1 of global development funding that goes to support to the media. 0.1%. If that was to be changed just 2 notches up to 0.3%, it would make a huge, huge difference to the sustainability of media. And that is one of the biggest challenges that we are facing at the moment, the sustainability of public interest media. So the global media, in terms of what the Global Forum for Media Development is doing at the moment, is lobbying and negotiating with governments on particular principles around how media development is done globally. So that's one set, of issues. One of the things that we've also recently done is, I don't know if you are familiar with the International Fund for Public Interest Media, which will be launched. The first call for proposals, by the way, will be launched on the 3rd of May, World Press Freedom Day. And this is a global fund that was set up a few years ago, and it will now, on the 3rd of May, issue its first call for proposals and allocate funds or indicate which 15 countries are eligible for funding under this call for proposals. It is founded on the belief that public interest media must survive and that you cannot wait for some other development vehicle or fund to come 5-6 years down the line, because the media needs investment now.
Yeah.
Because if you're waiting 5 years down the line, those that you were trying to help may not exist anymore. So what GFMD has done, and it has tried to remain very neutral, was to undertake the studies on behalf of the International Fund for Public Interest Media as to how such a fund should be set up, how it should be managed, and who should benefit from it. So I'm very excited. On the 3rd of May, we will all know which countries will benefit and how. And how much.
Now, as you remain with the head of Global Forum for Media Development do you think the media has been partial in its reporting on the Ukraine war?
there are so many, again, so many angles to that, to the story. There has been bias in reporting. I will say that without a doubt. I think that you don't need to be a media expert to come to that conclusion. I've actually been astounded by some of the comments made on some of the leading media houses in the world. But the actual thing about this, Jemima, more than just the reporting on the war in the Ukraine, the thing that really bothers me is the fact that, I mean, yes, this is a war that has global ramifications, but there are so many conflicts around the world at this point in time. And if, the media also sets the agenda to an extent, and that has led to such a huge influx of support for the people of the Ukraine. And yes, they do deserve that support. Nobody should be in such a position. But I wish that that kind of support would go to the people in Tigray or the people in Elbow Delgado. So what the media has done is highlighted for me, how, audience are treated, how lives are treated, and how the media bias comes through.
And how they really set the agenda
and
at
indeed,
the end of the day.
Yeah.
Now, as we conclude this interview, there's always been people with different, there's always been the different schools of whether journalists should be activists, whether they should just be journalists, and where do you draw the line? What are your views on journalists doubling as activists?
I'll go back to an example of, I think, the best activist journalism that I've seen in my, a little time on this planet. And that is the activism that was done by the Namibian pre-independence. That was activist journalism. That was a publication that, by virtue of its name, made a very visible public stance on, its agenda, and it was very clear about it. I think that my interest originally in journalism was through a sense of activism, because I believe that journalists have a level of power that is afforded to them through the pen, through the microphone, to change the lives of ordinary people through the stories that they tell. So I really do believe that a sense of activism must be there. It is very, very important for you as a journalist to have a sense of, how do I put this? To have a sense of preserving the public good and working in the public interest. Yes. But you need to be very, very clear about your position and make that position known to your audience. I think transparency here is the key element. Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us, Zoe.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Now, thank you for tuning in. Have a good night.
Adam Tas is coming to Windhoek to help build a brighter future for education. Join us at the Sounds of Caring concert at Windhoek High School Vegkop on 20 and 21 May, where he will be performing with Von Arends and Rian Smith. Tickets cost $200 Namibian and are available via eticket.my.na. All proceeds go towards the African Child Development Trust.